It is the self or consciousness that activates the mind, even as wind rustles the leaves. It makes the senses function as the rider guides the horse. The self activates the mind. It's not as if the mind is something dormant or something in itself waiting to be activated. It creates the mind, and the mind is the tool of thinking. It's what gives rise to notions and concepts and percepts and so on. It gives rise to notions of the senses as the rider guides the horse. That's the ideal. Normally we identify with the horse rather than the rider. In fact, we ignore the rider altogether. Though the self is the lord of this body, it is ever engaged in diverse actions as if it were a slave. So again, we identify with the slave aspect. Not even a slave, it's more like an automaton, some sort of robotic thing, which is caught up in its various loops, doing the same things over and over again. And the Lord of the body's been forgotten. This self alone is to be sought, adored, and meditated upon. It is by resorting to it that one crosses this world appearance with its cycle of birth and death and delusion. It's to be sought, adored, and meditated upon. You seek it, in other words, you turn to it, you adore it in the sense that that's the direction you want to go in. You want to get closer and closer to it, and you meditate upon it. And as we found in the Yoga Vasishta meditation, when you meditate upon a deity, you identify with that deity, and here you meditate upon it in the sense that you realize your identity with it. So this is the spiritual practice. It is very easily accessible. It can be easily won over like a good friend, for it dwells in the heart lotus of everyone. So there's nothing difficult about it. It's something which has to be cultivated, this habit of turning to it, moving to it, identifying with it. It's the practice of winning over a good friend, because it's always there, in the heart lotus of everyone. Let's not get caught up in Kundalini chakras and all the rest of it. We've come across the heart before, and it simply means the essence. This is according to Bhagavan Ramana Maharishi. It is attained in one's own body without even the need to call upon it. It manifests itself and reveals itself even if it is contemplated for an instant. It's interesting what she says about the body here. I've tended to be a little bit wary about getting involved in notions of the body, because it tends to lead to the yogic idea of the spirit conquering the flesh and all the rest of it, and giving the body a very definite and not very complementary reality. We often get the notion in the Yoga Vasishta that liberation only comes after you've left the body. This is the Videha Mukta. But it's attained in one's own body. You don't call on it, you just turn to it. It manifests itself and reveals itself, even if it is contemplated for an instant. It's instantly realizable. Though it is a lord of all and is endowed with all excellences, one who adores it is free from arrogance and pride. This self dwells in all bodies, even as fragrance resides in flowers. Well, there's no reason for it not to be dwelling in all bodies, but this does sound a bit like a conjecture. But then, it resides in everything. It resides in a blade of grass. It resides in a video camera. It's all there. It is not realized by all because no one inquires into the truth concerning the self. If it is realized through self-inquiry, there is instant experience of supreme bliss and one gets an undying vision of truth. All fetters drop away, all enemies are quelled, and cravings do not agitate the mind. I think this supreme bliss is something which is characteristic of Yoga Vasishta. We've heard before that it's not always blissful. The main thing is it's the equanimity. It's given the impression here that once you hit it, once you turn to it, that's it. And a lot depends, I suppose, on your purity of mind. We heard earlier, in an earlier chapter, how Valmiki thought that before this teaching is taught, that the spiritual aspirant should be taught how to purify the mind. But that's not the condition for realizing this. You can realize this at any time. You can realize this, the truth of self-inquiry, at any time. But the thing is, you'll get diverted away from that truth, maybe quite quickly, because we do have a lot of pain. There is a lot of pain, and that pain can drag us away from this realization. So, if you don't experience this bliss, and it isn't, if you read the spiritual traditions about enlightenment and so on, you'll get all sorts of different accounts. Supreme bliss is not always a factor in these accounts. But what we can say is there is no room for any negativity, and if you detect any negativity, then this is something to look into and to look more deeply into. When it is seen, everything is seen. When it is heard, everything is heard. When it is touched, everything is touched. For the world is because it is. And this is quite nice. Because when it is seen, everything is seen. And this doesn't mean to say that you're seeing things, like into somebody else's living room and all the rest of it. This isn't a supernatural power. When it is seen, everything is seen. We have to take that quite literally. It's what it means is there is nothing else to be seen. That's it. There is nothing else to be heard. There is nothing else to be touched. This is the world, which is because it is.